Mercedes are back in business, and with 3 wins in the last 4 races of the season, as well as being on the podium on every race since Montreal, the Silver Arrows now believe that they have found the hidden weapon to fight for more wins in the remainder of 2024. With the Constructors' Championship not that far out of reach, and with Hamilton's far but still present hopes for the Drivers' Championship, can the Brackley-based squad make some noise in the last 10 races of the season? And if so, will this make Hamilton regret his decision to move to Ferrari? It's safe to say that Mercedes is one of the most positive surprises in 2024, especially from their Montreal upgrades onwards. But while the team has been caught in a negative fire thanks to the Russells' DSQ from Spa and what would have been a perfect weekend with a 1-2 finish, the team looks forward to the next race, and that is Zandvoort. There isn't a venue in which Hamilton would like to secure a win more in his career, in front of 300,000 Dutch fans who will be supporting Verstappen at the top of their lungs. And it seems like Mercedes will give him and Russell a secret ingredient that was dubbed to be a failure ahead of the Spa GP. The flaw that Mercedes brought to Spa has brought some trouble for them, to the point of the engineers and the high-profile staff in Mercedes actually scraping it off and continuing with their pre-Spa specifications. Of course, this rewarded them a lot with a very fast-paced car, but the team is adamant that it had nothing to do with the flaw and that they're ready to prove it in Zandvoort, where they will run it again. According to trackside engineer Andrew Shovlin, Hamilton and Russell will have a great chance of winning the upcoming race thanks to the newest upgrade, and while he admitted that compared to Red Bull and McLaren his team is still lacking in some departments, the positive momentum from the previous races is something he can bet heavily on. Adding further to this, Shovlin said, "We encountered some issues that we believe were mainly due to the setup and not the update in Spa. We gave the drivers a car that tended to bounce in fast corners, which is not good for their confidence." Spa and Silverstone are quite similar in terms of corner speeds, and it was the right decision to revert to a known specification. We have been working on understanding exactly what went wrong, and we're quite confident that we can reintroduce the Spa update at Zandvoort. Of course, the nature of these 2 tracks is vastly different, with Zandvoort providing 0 to no chances for overtaking apart from the main straight, and with the downforce requirements being higher compared to the Belgian GP, which is why a lot of effort will be put into the qualifying session. This is something that Mercedes have lacked in the past couple of races, but if the upgrades have brought the necessary downforce to compete with the top dogs, then they should fear nothing, because we've seen that the pace race of the W15 as well as the tyre management is much better from Montreal onwards, even though Shovlin insists that this is nowhere near where they want to be, and they still are a lot behind McLaren and Red Bull. But as I mentioned earlier in this video, Shovlin and Mercedes still feel like there are some aspects of the car that desperately needs to be improved, as he stated. "The circuits where we suffer the most are the real limited ones, especially in situations where it is very hot. If we struggled in Spielberg, in Budapest the gap was smaller. This leads us to think we have made a big leap forwards in terms of performance. If we then take Silverstone into consideration, we were very competitive. I think all the teams are trying to develop their own cars. If you don't do it even just for a weekend, you're left behind, because we're all working at an exhausting pace." What is also very important to note is that Mercedes are now very confident in the upgrades they're bringing to the car, which is why this will continue throughout the entirety of 2024, as the Silver Arrows will look to pose a serious threat in both of the championships. Of course, the goal is very distant, even for a team like McLaren, who has a second-place driver in Norris within 78 points behind Verstappen. But if we are to compare the strategies of Mercedes and McLaren, as well as the race-winning experience that Hamilton has behind his back, we would be right to make the assumption that if there is any team other than Red Bull to win a lot of races in 2024, it will be Mercedes. That is why Shovlin is ready to bring some more upgrades to the W15 and make sure that both of the drivers will be extremely happy with what they're provided from the team. And when talking about this in a greater extent, Andrew said, I wouldn't say we've been surprised by the progress we've made in the past couple of races. We set ourselves some very ambitious performance targets to make sure we were competitive enough to qualify on pole and win races by the end of the year. And then we put in some ambitious plans to meet that in stages with various updates. What has been brilliant to see is just how well the whole organization has responded to that challenge to try and get us back towards the front, and what we have done has delivered. But then again, the situation in the Drivers' and Constructors' Championship is favoring McLaren a bit more than Mercedes, primarily because the Woking-based squad found the development pace a bit earlier than the Silver Arrows, which provided them with a bit more competitiveness in the early stages of the season. Even with this in mind, Mercedes is the second-place team when it comes to most wins after Red Bull, 3, and it just goes to show that when the car's performance is there, all the team needs to see is a bit of better luck, such as Russell's situation in Silverstone and in Spa, even though the latter one could have been easily prevented by a better strategy from the team. This doesn't take away the fact that Mercedes is probably one of the fastest cars out there on a regular weekend, and the targets that they've set for the end of the year have been achieved a lot earlier. The entire scenario is benefiting the Silver Arrows a lot because they have two very competitive drivers who can extract the maximum out of the car, which cannot be said for a team like Red Bull, who are struggling massively with the underperformance of Perez. Right now, the difference in the Constructors' Championship between the first-place Red Bull and the fourth-place Mercedes is 142 points. But even if Mercedes manages to finish P2 or P3, with P3 being a realistic goal considering the drop in performance from Ferrari, then they should be happy because they did start a bit late with the process of finding performance on the W15. Hamilton believes that Zandvoort, as well as the remainder of 2024, is going to be extremely competitive, and we're going to have a 4-team battle at the front now that the regulations have converged into one, and now that the top of the grid has understood what needs to be done in order to have strong and competitive cars that can fight for wins on almost every race the F1 caravan visits. Elaborating on this, Hamilton said, "It's really fantastic, I think, for the sport to have such close teams and drivers. The pedigree of drivers at the top today are really elite and amazing. We didn't expect to be competing with the McLarens or the Red Bulls at this point in the season, with how we started off. So for us to now have closed up and be here, it's going to be one hell of a second half of the season. That is for sure." However, Hamilton shared a similar statement with Chauvelin when it comes to a surprise title charge in 2024 and what would be the perfect last dance for him and the Brackley-based squad, and when answering a question regarding whether his team could hope for this scenario in 2024, Hamilton categorically denied, adding, "No, it would be high hopes. But I mean, if we can continue with this kind of performance as we've had in the last few races, which has been fantastic, then it might be possible. I think if we can start our weekends off a little bit better, hopefully we can continue that. I think obviously the McLaren was very strong in Belgium. We were just a bit further ahead early in the race, but yeah, we've just got to keep pushing." With all this in mind, do you think that Mercedes' upgrades in Zandvoort will continue the winning streak of the Silver Arrows? And more importantly, do you think that they can pose a serious threat to McLaren and Red Bull in the Constructors' Championship? Let us know in the comments below.